There is a country south of China that's home to some amazing architecture, a gold rock that defies gravity, and a holy python that can bless you. Yet what is this country actually called? Well, some would say Burma, while others would say Myanmar. Officially the country was called Burma and has since changed its name to Myanmar, but of course as always there is a lot more to it than that. But first let's look at that original name of Burma. Just where did that come from? One idea is that it comes from the name of Brahma, Brahma being the creator god in Hinduism, and the name Burma in Burmese is Burma. The English name Burma, however, is thought to come from the Portuguese name for the country, Birmania. The name Burma too refers to the largest group of people in the land area, the Burma people. The actual country of Burma dates all the way back to the 11th century when King Anuwata united the state. Even though it was united as one nation, there were still political issues in the country. In the 1800s, the British saw Burma's instability and took over the country after 3 Anglo-Burmese wars. During World War II in 1942, however, Japanese troops invaded and occupied Burma. They were helped by the Japanese-trained Burma Independence Army, who were led by a young Burmese law student named Aung San. The Japanese promised Aung San and his army that if they helped win the war, they would give Burma their independence. Yet when it became clear the Japanese would not stick to their word, Aung and his men switched sides and helped the British defeat the Japanese, eventually liberating Burma from Japanese control in 1945. While now liberated, Aung San and members of his interim government were assassinated by political opponents, eventually leading to true independence with foreign former minister Un Nu as the nation's first prime minister. This was but a brief look at the history of the country formerly known as Burma. While it gained independence in 1948, it wasn't until 1989 the country would be renamed Myanmar. So what happened in between? Well, by the 1960s, Un Nu's government was starting to anger the military. Throughout the 60s, 70s and 80s there were many military coups, with one coup in 1989 led by General Saw Ma that decided to change the country's English name to Myanmar, as the original name of Burma was felt to be a relic of British colonial past, and the name Myanmar was more inclusive to other ethnicities of the country, not just the aforementioned Burma people. So where does this name come from, however? The name Myanmar actually has the same etymological roots of its earlier name Burma, coming from the people. The name Myanmar in Burmese is Myanmar or Myanmar. The main difference between these names comes from the register in which they are used. Register in language means the degree or formality and the situation in which the language is being used. This has led to Myanmar being the more formal way to refer to the country and write the name, with Burma being the more colloquial name used in day-to-day talk. And it seems that this is the way the country is today, with both names being used interchangeably, even with Barack Obama referring to the country by both names in a speech during his 2012 visit to the country. Yet the Burma-Myanmar debate seems to only exist in the English language, as even in the national anthem the country is still referred to as Burma Pir, which means the country of Burma. Ethiopia is one of the largest and oldest independent countries in Africa, never to be colonised by another nation, well minus 5 years of occupation from Mussolini's Italy. It is also the second most populated country in Africa, and the most populated landlocked country in not just Africa but the whole world. While this ancient country may now be known as Ethiopia, this wasn't always the case, as historically the country went by a different name, Abyssinia. So where did these two names come from, and why was the name changed from Abyssinia to Ethiopia? Like I said, Ethiopia is an incredibly ancient country, having its roots in 980 BCE with the Kingdom of Demut, so this isn't as clear to us. Like how the country of Burma changed its name to Myanmar, the name Abyssinia too isn't as clear to us. It's thought to come from the Arabic Habasa, coming from the Amharic Habash and the Arabic Habash, which means mixed and a mixture respectively. So why is it thought that Abyssinia was named after a word for mixing? Well, this is because the land of Abyssinia was the home to a mixture of people and races that lived on the land. Nevertheless, this Arabic word of Habasa was Latinized over time to Abyssinia. The name Ethiopia, however, is of Greek origin, coming from the Greek Ethiopia. Ethiopia is thought to come from the Greek ethor, meaning I burn, and the Greek ops, meaning face. This etymology references a burnt face, but why exactly? Well, this etymology is of Greek origin. It's not a native Ethiopian name, though Ethiopia's native name in Amharic is now a variation of it. To these Europeans, one of the most striking features of this land would have been the darker skin tone of the people who lived there. A lot of Europeans may have never seen people with darker skin, leading to them referring to these darker skinned people as having burnt faces, in turn naming the country after this. Without delving into whole other subject areas that would not only involve my personal opinions over fact, but would probably enrage the YouTube gods, I won't talk about the social issues that could arise from this name. Perhaps that can be a video for another time. So that's where the two names come from, but when exactly did the name change from Abyssinia to Ethiopia? Well, like I said earlier, there wasn't a clear-cut changing of names. It seems the names throughout history have been used interchangeably. One of the earliest times the name was changed from Abyssinia to Ethiopia was in the 4th century CE, when King Azana of the Kingdom of Aksum wanted to convert his kingdom to Christianity, feeling Ethiopia was a more Christian name for the country as opposed to Abyssinia. But the name Abyssinia would appear once again, though unofficially. The Ethiopian Empire lasted from 1270 to 1974. That's over 700 years. This empire was also known as Abyssinia. Even today, some languages still use a variation of Abyssinia over a variation of Ethiopia as the name for the country. Mumbai is the most populated city in all of India. Its trains carry around 6 million people every day, and it's the home of Bollywood, the hub of the Indian film industry. Yet, ask a lot of people about the city of Mumbai and they will either look at you in confusion or go, "Oh, do you mean Bombay?" This is because for the longest time the city of Mumbai was called Bombay, yet in recent years the city changed its name to Mumbai. So why did Bombay change its name to Mumbai? Yet before Mumbai and Bombay, the city has had other names. The city was originally founded on 7 islands and was part of the Ashoka kingdom. It's believed that some of the city's oldest names are Kakamushi and Galajongsha, but as for what these names mean, I don't know. Many sources told me that these were the city's original names, but none of them explained to me what these names actually meant. Nice one, internet. But if any of you guys know where these names come from, why not tell me down below? The name Mumbai, however, actually predates the name of Bombay. It's a name that comes from the local people of the Bombay Islands, the Koli people. The name Mumbai comes from the temple of the Koli goddess Mumba, and I means mother in the Marathi language. The Marathi language being the language spoken by the people in the Maharashtra state, where the city of Mumbai is. So a combination of the name of the goddess Mumba and the Marathi I put together created the name for the city of Mumbai. It's the Portuguese, however, we have to thank for the name Bombay. One of the earliest written mentions of the name Bombay comes from the Legends of India by Portuguese explorer Gaspar Correa in 1508. However, it was spelt Bombay as opposed to the name we know it as today, Bombay. It's believed this name comes from the Portuguese word for good, bom, with the bay part simply meaning bay. So the name Bombay means the good bay, as the city is built on the aforementioned islands. It's also believed by some that the name Bombay is an English corruption of Mumbai. Bombay is still used today in Portuguese speaking parts of the world, but the name was anglicised to Bombay when the British Empire took control of the city in the 17th century. And it was this name that the city was known as until 1995, when the Shiv Sena party came into power in the Maharashtra state of India. They believed that the name Bombay was a relic of India's British colonial past. They wished to go back to the Mumbai name to celebrate the city's Maharashtra heritage. Yet this isn't a singular incident of a city changing its name in India, but part of an ongoing series of cities in India changing their names, and a lot of these cities ridding the names from their colonial past, such as Calcutta changing to Kolkata in 2001, Kolkata being a shortened form of a Kolikata, the name of one of the villages that existed on the land before the British took over, and one of the biggest changes being the city of Madras changing its name to Chennai in 1996. Madras coming from the colonial version of a fishing town in current Chennai, Madras Pattanam. The name Chennai comes from supposedly either the ruler, the Mala Chennappa Nayakudu, or from the Chennai Kesava Perumal temple. I have no idea if I said those right. Yet it seems that the changing of Bombay to Mumbai is the one that has caught the most attention from the non-Indian world, with Bombay still being a word frequently seen within the English language. But as they say, Mumbai is a city, Bombay is an emotion, and of course it's still called Bollywood, not Mollywood. Now, the world may currently be watching another country go through a name change. It was last year in 2018 when we saw another nation change its name. I should have covered this when it was relevant, but being topical has never been my strongest point. This was of course when in April of 2018, it was announced that the nation of Swaziland would change its name to Eswatini. Eswatini is a relatively small landlocked nation nestled between Mozambique and South Africa. Despite being so small, it has vast mountains running across its eastern edge. So wait a minute, landlocked, small and mountainous? It's easy to see why people get the names of Swaziland and Switzerland mixed up, more on that later. Starting in 1906, Swaziland, as it was called at that time, was ruled over by the British as one of their colonies. However, this wasn't forever, as in 1965 1968, Swaziland became an independent nation once again. In fact, the name change coincided with 50 years of independence from the British. But what about that name? Well, the initial name was Swaziland anyway. If you're a long-time viewer, and if you aren't, then don't forget to subscribe, I'm sure you have a fair idea as to what this name means. We see the land suffix in country names so often, and the previous part of these names usually tell us who that land belongs to. In this case, it is of course the Swazi people, also known as the Swati, with Swaziland meaning the land of the Swazi. So where exactly did the name of these people come from? Well, luckily we actually have a clear answer to this for once. The name comes from the name of one of their former kings, King Mswati II, who reigned from 1840 to 1868. Mswati II is considered to be one of the greatest kings in African history, claiming more land for Swaziland than anyone else, even land they have since lost. It was the name of this great king that his followers and the nation became named after. Yet that was Mswati II. Fast forward 150 years to 2018 and we have the current king of Eswatini, Mswati III. Mswati III took over the throne at just 18 years old and hasn't built quite the same reputation as Mswati II. His luxurious and polygamous lifestyle has left many of his subjects not too happy to call him their king. Nevertheless, it was in 2018 he announced that the country would now be called Eswatini as opposed to Swaziland. This name change happened for a couple reasons. One, as we mentioned earlier, he was getting annoyed about the Swaziland-Switzerland mix-up, and secondly, he was not happy that the former name of Swaziland was a mixture of Swazi and English. Many African nations took their former native names after colonial rule in them had ended. King Mswati wished for this remnant of colonial rule to be gone, and now it is. Luckily, however, we don't need to look too deeply into this name, as this name too means exactly what Swaziland meant too, the land of the Swazi. Yet, how was he able to change the name of the country so easily? As we are witnessing now with Greece and Macedonia, big changes to a country like this aren't usually so easy to push through. Also, this Portuguese coverage of the whole Greece-Macedonia situation actually used my video to help explain the situation. They didn't credit me or ask my permission. It's cool but kind of weird and anyway, the reason the king could so easily change this is due to the fact that Eswatini is Africa's last absolute monarchy, which means that he and he alone has more or less complete control over anything in the nation. If he wants to change the name, he simply can, without having to seek approval from any government bodies or his subjects. Of course, however, while he may have been able to change the nation's name easily, that doesn't mean that actually doing so will be as easy. It's safe to say there's a lot to get done when having to change a country's name. Think of all the places that name will be changed. The currency, airlines, well, they're one airplane, signs at borders, literally everywhere the name is written will need to be changed. Luckily, however, the name Swaziland doesn't appear in their national anthem, so that's one thing they can keep. Vietnam is known for many things, from stunning scenery to busy cities, and of course war flashbacks where you tilt your head and look off into the distance. You weren't there, man. Anyway. Vietnam is a part of the world oddly known as Indochina. Indochina is such an odd name as Vietnam, along with the other nations of Indochina such as Laos and Cambodia, aren't really a part of China or India. It's because of where this part of the world is located, tucked in between China and India. Southeast Asia, however, is a much less confusing name. This video, however, is just about the nation of Vietnam, so where did that name come from exactly? The name Vietnam actually comes from two Vietnamese words, Viet and Nam. That first word of Viet comes from the name of the people who lived there, the Bac Viet, who in English are known as the Bayou. Look at that, another place named after people who live there. We aren't too sure from where the name Bac Viet comes from, but the Viet part is thought to come from Chinese, meaning far off and beyond. As to the Chinese, the Vietnamese people would have been far off, especially the people in the southern parts of Vietnam. Speaking of southern Vietnam, this brings us nicely to the Nam part of the Vietnam name, which in Vietnamese means south, as the Bac Viet people were in the south of modern Vietnam, and of course to China, Vietnam was in the south. China has played a large part in Vietnamese history. In fact, for the longest time, Vietnam was ruled by the Chinese, which started in 111 BCE and is thought to have come to an end in 938 CE. It's from this time of rule where we get the name of Annam for Vietnam. This name for Vietnam is of Chinese origin. As you can see, the Nam part of the name is still here, once again meaning south. Chinese and Vietnamese are similar languages, so it makes sense that this Nam part would mean south in Chinese and Vietnamese. So what does the An part mean? Well, this comes from the Chinese An, meaning peace. So this name means the pacified south, as to the Chinese, this part of the world was in the south. and peaceful. This name for Vietnam carried over to when the French took control of Indochina between 1887 to 1945. While it was only the easternmost point of modern Vietnam that was referred to as Annam, in the west this name became synonymous with all of Vietnam. However, in 1940 the Japanese invaded and took over Vietnam. Luckily, however, when they were defeated by 1945, Vietnam not only declared themselves independent from the Japanese, but from the French too, ridding themselves of the name Annam that was bestowed upon them by the Chinese and held onto by the French, and returning to a name from their own language which represented their own people, Vietnam. Often look at places that once had one name but now have completely different names, and of course a great example of this would be with the capital of China, which was once called Peking but is now called Beijing in the English language. It's not hard to see that these are quite clearly two completely different names. Now this might sound crazy, but what if I told you that despite the city famously going through a name change, it actually never changed its name? Crazy, right? Well, hear me out. To start with, let's look at that original name of Peking. What does this name actually mean? In Hanzi, the name of the Chinese writing system, this is spelt like this, which breaks into the two Chinese words meaning north and capital, meaning this original name of Peking means north capital. Despite being the only capital in China now, it was the northern capital when China was split into various dynasties, with the city of Nanking's name meaning south capital. However, if we look at the city's modern name of Beijing, you may notice a similarity. The names of Peking and Beijing in Hanzi are spelled exactly the same, and once again the name Beijing breaks up into the two Chinese words for north and capital. So I'm sure you can understand a bit more now when I say that despite the city changing its name, it also didn't. How on earth can this etymological oxymoron be the case? The Peking to Beijing name change isn't a name change like we usually look at. This wasn't an outright changing of names, but rather a changing of pronunciation. Each character of any given language more or less always has a set sound it represents, or at least a vaguely similar sound. Even here in the English language, every character doesn't make the exact sound all the time. Look at our letter of O. You can hear it make different sounds depending on what word it's being used in. It can be a short sound like we hear in dog, a long sound like we're in old, or a reduced sound like we hear in above. This video actually has nothing to do with the O sound in the English language, but it's just a great example of how a single character of a language can produce so many different sounds. And in the grand scheme of writing systems, English is pretty simple, and of course with English being the lingua franca that it is, it means words of languages from around the world that don't use the Latin alphabet like we have in English have to be transliterated into English, which means we don't only need to figure out how to write words in English that derive from non-Latin alphabet, but also how to pronounce them. And in Chinese, multiple ways of transliterating Hanzi to English have been formed, leading to various Chinese words being able to be spelled and pronounced differently in English. The transliteration method that gave us Peking in the English-speaking world is called the Chinese postal map romanization method, which was based heavily on the Wade-Gile system of transliteration, with this system being founded by Sir Thomas Francis Wade and Herbert Allen Giles. Their system of transliteration easily allowed the characters of Chinese to be transferred into English, with the name of the northern capital becoming Peking thanks to this system. And while it was this name that took off in the English-speaking world, the northern capital was and has never been called Peking in its home nation of China. If you called Beijing Peking to a Chinese person, there's a high chance they'll have no idea you are talking about their capital city. In Chinese, this city's name has always been pronounced as Beijing. However, the city's name remained Peking in much of Europe all the way up until 1979, when the Chinese government of the time grew tired of outsiders referring to their capital city as what they saw to be the wrong name. They insisted that instead of using the Wade-Gile system of transliterating the name, they used the pinyin transliteration method, which more accurately translates Chinese names into English and maintains the original Chinese pronunciation. And in pinyin, Peking became Beijing, which is now the name for the city used in the English-speaking world. However, the name Peking can still be found. Beijing Airport's location identifier still references the name Peking, and of course Peking can still be seen in Chinese cuisine, like we see with Peking duck. While this city is firmly established as Beijing now in the English-speaking world, the name Peking can still be found in other nations across the globe, with languages like French, German, Spanish, Russian, and Japanese, to name a few, still using names that reflect the capital's past as Peking. But for us in the English language, while it might seem like the city changed its name, it actually never did. It was just the pronunciation that changed.